Gather around your speakers, hoop heads. It's NBA story time. Jamel Johnson here to spin you tales of NBA shenanigans you didn't know you needed to know. Like that time when a little startup league tried anything to be relevant. Or when Ricky Davis earned himself a dumb nickname. I also love you, Ricky Davis. Catch a new tale on NBA Storytime every week, then listen to the post-game where I break it down with comedians, ballers, and what have you. Find NBA Storytime on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello and welcome to Talking Football Extra, the Bundesliga show, your source for all things German football. This week we'll be talking about one of the all-time greats of German football. On Sunday we were saddened to hear that Der Bomber der Nation passed away. So in this episode we'll be trying to talk about Gerd Müller's legacy within German football. Müller was the most lethal striker that the Bundesliga has ever seen. Most of his records from the 60s and 70s still stand to this day. So there's plenty to talk about. My name is Nick Wiltag and I'm joined by Susie Scharf, who truly is a German national team aficionado and Bayern Munich expert. So, Susie, welcome to the show.
Nick, thank you for having me, and it's lovely to be on a podcast.
It is great to have you. I mean, James has talked to you in the past, Matt has talked to you in the past. Now it's my turn because, both of us do share a passion for a bit of, the historic side of the Bundesliga and Bayern Munich. And, well, Susie, when it comes to Gerd Müller, where shall we start? I mean, we could run down the stats saying that he scored 523 goals in 580 competitive outings for Bayern. Incredible, 365 of those goals came in the Bundesliga. Additionally, there are 34 goals in 35 European Cup matches. But shouldn't we just start with the fact that his signing in 1964 was actually a pivotal moment in Bayern Munich's history?
Yeah, that's a great place to begin. And it would forever change. It would actually be right before the start of the Bundesliga in total, and really the start of the first period of dominance for Bayern Munich in the league. This also kind of ran along the same lines of West Germany's period of dominance as well. And these are games, obviously I was just a wee little thing, so these weren't games I was seeing live. It was only later in life that I got to see historical games like that on tape for Bayern and for West Germany. But he's the reason why I love football and was immense in bringing German football, along with the rest of his teammates, of course. One man is not a team, but he was definitely a legend and something special and crucial to Germany's dominance in that period and Bayern Munich's influence heading forward and even to this day.
Indeed. I mean, about this signing, there are so many funny side notes to it because, for one, I mean, many of you may not know this, but Gerd Müller in his youth used to be a Nuremberg fan. So their club, which is one of Bayern's rivals from, Franconia, they are probably sick to their stomach to this day that they never even considered signing him. And additionally, 1860 Munich arrived on the same day as Bayern's officials made sure of that transfer to sign Müller. So history could have gone so many other directions with Gerd Müller, which is really an interesting side note.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny that the way the world works and the way that football works, I mean, what could have been or what would have been the fate of clubs that exist today could have been completely different.
Yes, indeed. Knowing that you do live in Florida and that Gerd Müller has played in Florida, have you ever met him by any chance?
Yes, I actually have. He opened a restaurant called the Ambry, which happened to be, less than 2 miles from my house. And that's a place, especially during the winter months, where all the Germans that came and spent their winters in Florida, they would come congregate there. And he opened it as kind of a lark. He was a bit of a playboy in his Fort Lauderdale Striker days. So his teammates and the opposing teammates in the NASL after matches, it was on the same main road. The stadium that they played at, Lockhart Stadium, was probably about maybe 3 or 4 miles from there. So they'd all head over to his restaurant after the matches. But it was generally a place that a lot of Germans congregated. And since we were German and Germans congregated there, my mother would take my sister and I there. Sometimes after matches, try and keep us separated from the boozing at the bar. But yeah, I was introduced to him, and this is right at the beginning of my, I guess, football watching career, very briefly. And I probably looked like a boy. I don't know. I don't remember specifically what the conversation was, but I was in awe of everything. Imagine being like a very impressionable, 7 or 8 year old person, right? With all these big guys around you and very gregarious conversation. And after getting to see the Fort Lauderdale Strikers, in the stadium, seems to be like it was overwhelming then. And, even in the present day, even though I was a writer about everything, I'm still definitely a Bayern Munich supporter, so even today I meet players and my heart, and my heart races and, you still have that, I guess there's that little girl feeling of excitement, somewhere inside of you. You're like, oh my God, this is actually happening, whether you can keep a straight face about it or not. It's still that same kind of feeling.
Well, I've worked as a freelance journalist in Norway, and let me tell you, when you meet René Klingbeil in the mix zone, it's not that same feeling. Be that as that may. We've all known that Gerd Müller has been in a care home for some time, but Jupp Heynckes spoke about him after his passing and said that Gerd Müller, he always was a guy who never put himself above anybody else. He always was a caring person, and he was somebody who people could relate to. Did you feel that in the meeting with him, that he was a very sort of relatable guy, or were you just too frightened to notice anything at all?
No, and this is mostly with like an adult's perspective rather than a child's wonderment, learning about his life over the years and his trials with alcoholism and his partying lifestyle. He was a guy. He was an everyman. He was not a pillar. He was not a statue to be adored. You confer legend status upon legends, hopefully, right? Whether they're legends that are playing now or whether they were legends in the past in history, historical legends. He was a guy with problems like everybody else has problems. And probably what made him so beloved is he didn't try and put himself above that. Like, that was him, a humble guy who he did what he did. And there's something to be said for that. I never felt like there was an aloofness, like maybe that you would get. I don't know. I don't want anybody bad mouthing me if I make a choice, but you understand what I'm saying, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I absolutely feel that. I've never met the guy, even not as an 8-year-old. I've read about him in loads and loads of books, and one of the stories that really stuck with me was the fact when he actually managed to score 40 goals in the 71-72 season. The mayor of Noldingen, the place where he was from, said, "Boy, we want to erect a statue in your honor." And Gerd Müller said, "No, I'm not important enough for any statue of me to be erected. Please don't." And he was such an unassuming, lovely, nice man at the bottom of his heart. And it wasn't sort of like, with Uli Hoeneß, you could have imagined him saying no, but he would have sort of played the mind game of, would this help my career? Would people think I'm too big on myself? Or, how should I go about this? Statue of me. With Gerd Müller, it was just simple, no, please don't. Please don't. I'm not that type of person. Please don't erect a statue of me. I'm just Gerd. That really sums up that man quite beautifully in this one anecdote. And I don't know where it comes from. Maybe it was his upbringing. Maybe it was even the fact that his first coach at Bayern, Chick Tchaikovsky, He was actually rather underwhelmed when he saw him the first time around after the club had signed Müller in '64, and he actually gave him his nickname that stuck with him for quite some time, which was Kleines Dickes Müller, which translates to short, chubby Müller. But with Müller, Tchaikovsky would soon find out that Bayern with or without Müller, that were two completely different sides at times in the 60s and 70s, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So when we debate grades, and, Gerd Müller, Jupp Heynckes said, if there was a heaven and God would have a football team, who's in charge of goals right now. But oftentimes, the debate of former greats like Netzer, Beckenbauer, and Müller gets to the point where people say, would they make it as a footballer now? Would they be capable of playing in the Bundesliga in today's days and age? What do you think about Gerd Müller? Do you think he could make it as a player even today?
I do. Strangely, I do. I feel like the talent that he possessed to be in the right place at the right time. Obviously, he was only 5'9", which is short for a striker, and he didn't have the typical football body.
Kleines Dickes Müller.
Yeah, Kleines Dickes Müller, which funnily enough, think about modern football and Bayern Munich specifically, and his namesake, Thomas Müller, who is this awkward guy, skinny, lanky, the physicality doesn't match between the two of them, but their football brain, I think, matches quite a lot. Finding themselves in the right place at the right time, making what seems like a split-second decision, whether you're adjusting your body just a little bit just to get a right angle for a shot, or in Müller's case, an assist, not the typical or prototypical football guy. But Gerd Müller was able to always be in a position for headers, always be in position where he was supposed to be, was not super flashy, although at times results from things that he did were. Yeah, I think he absolutely could compete today.
I would agree with you, because when you watch old tapes, and I think where the history writing and his Wikipedia page and the way he's been portrayed, almost 50 years after he finished playing is he's oftentimes portrayed as that guy who could get into the box and just finish off a move. But when you watch Bayern from the 70s and late 60s, he actually is quite involved in that passing game. The pass combinations between Beckenbauer and Müller, they were actually quite fluid. He had a footballing brain. He knew how to move. He wasn't just the guy who knew where to pop up in the box. He also knew how to play the game. And, that is something that it is a must these days. I mean, you had some strikers from the 60s and 70s who just were basically lurking around and getting lucky. Gerd Müller wasn't one of those guys. He had a footballing brain, and for that, he pretty much managed to score goals galore. And at the same time, he also managed to queue up a lot of his teammates, and that is oftentimes forgotten.
General managers ask questions to find the right players, like, do they have ice in their veins? When you're hiring, you can use Indeed assessments to make sure you find the right candidates with the skills you need. Don't just hope your perfect candidate will find you. Indeed's hiring tools help you cut through the noise to hire faster and smarter. In fact, Indeed Instant Match provides a list of quality candidates whose resumes are on Indeed the moment you post a sponsored job. And with Indeed assessments, choose from 135 skills tests to help make sure you're finding applications from people with skills you need. Get started right now with a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Get a $75 credit at Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Offer valid through September 30th. Terms and conditions apply.
This episode is brought to you by HP. Whenever you do your best thinking, the HP Spectre X360 is ready when inspiration strikes. With power save for battery life and focus mode to multitask, you can do your best thinking whenever and wherever it happens. You can't always schedule when and where you might have a brilliant thought, Whether it's in the morning or before bed, when you're at your computer or away from it, thinking can happen anywhere and anytime. The HP Spectre X360 2-in-1 convertible PC with Windows 10 saves battery life for whenever an idea hits you. HP Spectre X360, a more thoughtful laptop.
But having mentioned his career at Bayern, having mentioned all those numbers and stats, we should also talk about him in the national team. So if you want to tell our listeners what you think about Gerd Müller and the national team, what do you think? Was he also a very pivotal character there? Kind of a leading question, this.
I think I started watching German soccer. There was a venerable television program in the United States called Soccer Made in Germany, right? And it used to be on our public broadcasting station on Sundays, if I recall. Yeah, Sundays. So, and me starting out as a fan came, this is going to sound like a really weird and long story. I should probably shorten it a little bit, but I started watching Brazil before I started watching Germany, and that was because my father lived there. So I grew up as a Brazilian fan until I started watching Gerd with the Strikers. And then slowly my attention turned away from the post-Pele era of Brazil, or actually at the tail end of his career, into the tail end of Gerd Müller's career, and that led me to Bayern and onward, and here we are now. But also the German national team has been a great part of my football watching history and lessons, especially lessons from the 1974 World Cup, beating Johan Cruyff's Dutch team in the final, him scoring the winning goal. You kind of feel like there was this sort of, like I said earlier, there was this sort of parallel between Bayern Munich and the German team at the time. It was the same sort of dominance to me, and it really, like I said, it was tough to draw away from Brazil, right? And two completely different styles where it seemed that the German national team was more physical and more hard-nosed, and there was always that, quote, workmanship quality about them. And I remember watching when I was younger and seeing this sort of physicality and thinking to myself, oh, I like this. This is how I want to play. And that era is golden to rewatch matches and to see. You can still see a lot of modern football in it.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, what really struck me about that German national team is that, historically speaking, the 74 World Cup is always remembered for the World Cup that should have been won by the Dutch. But when you watch that final, it's really a match on equal footing, really. So I don't think it's all that undeserved that if you just see that one match and don't think about the entire World Cup, but just see that one match, I don't think it's all that undeserved that Germany actually won it. I might have Nationalmannschaft tainted glasses here, but that's my point of view. And Gerd Müller, absolutely pivotal guy. Funnily enough, this goal that he scored in the World Cup, the winner, that wasn't actually rated as the goal of the year in '74. That was actually scored by Erwin Kosteter, another striker who struggled with alcohol. And you mentioned it already, Gerd Müller. He had a large demon in his life, which was the booze, wasn't it? So what do you know about his struggle with the alcoholism, and how did it affect him in his playing days, and how did it affect him afterwards?
So what I know about it is, like I said, the beginnings of when he opened his restaurant. Obviously, he was drinking heavily before this, but still performed at a high level. And then you moved to the NASL. Those were glory days of the NASL, but I am sure the competition was a little bit less strenuous than you would have found on, say, the German national team or in the Bundesliga at the time. He was a drinker. He was a party guy. I'm sure Uschi knows I'm not saying anything that she doesn't, but, he was a ladies' man, and he was that charming every guy. He's approachable and likable. on the surface, a happy guy that drank a lot, and obviously it catches up with you at some point, especially if you're an alcoholic. Those party days, nothing lasts forever. And I'm almost positive that his problems with alcohol probably led to a cognitive decline, which assisted his Alzheimer's diagnosis in the future. And it was great for him to be able to come clean, and for Bayern Munich to pick him up as a family. They got him to get his, together, get his life together, get his act together after coming back to Germany from the States, and kind of picked him up and said, and they gave him a home and a family of people, and they kept him around, of course, to keep watch over him, but also, to keep him of value, and he also could be valued in that way.
He was actually, was he assistant coach for the second team for some time?
Yes.
So he actually went to the training pitch every day, and that is really one thing that is key in recovery of when it comes to any addiction, really, is that you do have the feeling that you have to go to something that is valuable in life.
Yes.
Which keeps you from drinking or abusing the drugs you were using before.
Yeah.
Because as long as you don't feel any value, what else is there?
Right. And being grateful for your surroundings and the people in your life, and Bayern Munich as not just a club, but an extended family. Could you imagine being a kid in Bayern Munich too, and having Gerd Müller as your co-trainer? Jeez Louise, you think about stuff like that. I would be speechless. Yes, sir. No, sir. Every day. I'm saluting right now. Nobody can see this. That must have been a treat. And I don't hear too many, or I haven't heard too many stories about him as being a co-trainer as far as interpersonal, conversations. But I can only imagine and hope, in my imagination, having the co-trainer pull you over to give you a talk about whatever would have been wow, to the player, very, very important all the time.
Yeah, well, in his older days, he looked like the nice geography teacher. And he, as we said, he was a softly spoken gentleman who was unassuming, who was kind to everybody, really. Maybe not kind to Uschi during those lady chasing days, but that truly must have been hard on her, I would imagine. But again, she stayed with him, and probably for good reason, I would imagine. So what do I know about their marriage? Nothing. Well, to round off our discussion, when you heard about Gerd Müller's passing, what were your first thoughts? You've already mentioned a lot about how you've related to him throughout your life. What were your first thoughts that struck you? What was going through your mind?
This is not hyperbole, but it was like a cavalcade of every emotion, almost every emotion. At first, I just felt this. There's a survivor's guilt in this. A lot of people will know, or at least people that follow me on Twitter or know of my writings or whatever. My mother suffered from Alzheimer's at the same time that Gerd Müller did. So I was actively writing about football when he was diagnosed. And that hit me in the same sort of way that his death did, just because he's the reason why I started watching football, right? The reason why I really, really got into Germany and really, really got into Bayern Munich. And for him to suffer the same fate that my mother went through. So the sense of relief is when it's all over. My mother passed in 2018. When it's all over, there is a weight that as a caregiver or as a family member, as a loved one, that is lifted off your shoulders. So that is a sense of relief. when you see somebody that is stricken with that, it's the most terrible thing, and it's terrible. It's just the worst disease in the world, especially at the end stages. It's god awful. So I felt relief for Ushi and their family and all of their loved ones, any caretakers he had, his doctors, everyone who encountered him, especially in the late Alzheimer's stages. There's a relief. And then there's just this overwhelming sadness because really, if you knew him or knew of him, you started losing him years ago. There's this slow, inexorable slide towards the end, and that's it. And you can't do anything about it, so there's this very slow period of mourning. And you think maybe when you get to the end, you can handle it better, but you don't. Or I find I didn't. Maybe there are people who approach it differently. So that is all mixed up for me. My mother's condition and his, and football and Germany and history and things, they all coexist in my mind together. They're all in the same space, if that makes any sense. And, I kind of jotted down some thoughts on Twitter real quick and just about the parallels. And I had linked an article that I'd written about Gerd Müller earlier for ESPN FC. And then I just stopped talking and I took it all in. And I cried. I cried for several hours. And it was for him, but it was for everything else as well. I don't know if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I mean, as you say, it's such a god-awful disease, and there's really nothing that can help it.
Yeah.
There are no drugs. There's no cure. Nothing. And I don't mention this an awful lot on this podcast, but I'm a certified nurse here in Norway. I've worked in, part of my training has been working at nursing homes, and I've met patients with Alzheimer's, and
it's the worst.
It's
right?
a god-awful disease. Yeah, I mean, the other disease I absolutely don't want to get personally is ALS. I've seen that too. But yes, Alzheimer's is the worst thing you could possibly imagine. And to see that slow decline, and, what many of you probably maybe don't know is the fact that patients with Alzheimer's, they actually do have at times moments of clarity where they just get to themselves for a moment and then slide back into, their decline again.
Yeah, we call them plateaus here. It levels out for a while, and then you'll get a little raise in like cognitive awareness or spatial awareness, and then it slides down again, and then it plateaus, and then there's maybe a little peak or two, and then it slides down again.
But those things, the terrible things that you do see is that it gives a hope to the relatives, and
I made a decision. There are drugs available that can keep an Alzheimer's patient at a more stable mental level for a period of time, but then those stop working eventually, and I kept my mother off of them. I made a personal decision to keep her off of them because there is no other way that is going to go. You know what I mean? And that's like the hopelessness. Why would I prolong the hopelessness? And so I have so much feeling for Ushi and the family, because I know exactly firsthand how brutal and difficult it is. And I am so sorry that I know we don't want to put him on a pedestal and on a statue.
He didn't want to be on the statue himself.
Yeah, I know. He didn't even want to be a statue. But I'm so sorry that he had to go through this. And I'm so sorry that he's gone for this reason. It sucks. The footballing world, the world lost a legend, lost a good dude that happened to be a legendary football player.
I mean, when I see the Messis and Ronaldos of today and I see Gerd Müller, I know which I would prefer. That's all I'm saying. And it's definitely good. I prefer the flawed guy who is just a normal guy who's unassuming, but just a bloody good footballer as well at the same time and doesn't make a fuss about it. Yeah, I'm the same way. I prefer that. I like that honesty a lot better than I do. You find that very rarely in the modern game, or a lot less rarely in the modern game today. You do indeed. Susie, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you personally for the first time. To round this off, tell our listeners where they can find you on Twitter and, if you want to hire Susie, she's a damn good writer and she knows an awful lot. She knows an awful lot about German football and Bayern Munich. Yeah. So if you want somebody of that caliber, you should get her Twitter handle. Yeah. Find me mostly at Twitter these days at the Susie Schaaf, TheSusieschaaf. Yeah, like Nick said, I'm not doing any podcasting or writing these days, but I've been thinking about dipping my toe back in. Yeah, if you want me to be your place to start, go ahead and reach out. I'd love to hear from you. Nick, again, it was a pleasure finally getting to chat with you after having chatted with your counterparts in the past, and please give my regards to them both. I will. And thank you so much for having me today. And yeah, even though this episode or this part of the podcast is laced in sadness, what I try to do, or what I've tried to do, is just think about what a kick-ass footballer he was. And I've been filling my YouTube queue with great goals and great games as well. And I advise everybody to do the same. Here. I completely agree with that. And yes, absolutely a pleasure getting to know you. And you know what? Let's do this again at some point this season. And let's talk about something, I don't know, a little less sad, hopefully. Yes, absolutely. I would love to come back at any moment. All right, we are really looking forward to that. You can find me, Nick Wiltine, on Twitter at NorMusings. You can hit up the podcast collectively at Talking Foosball if you have any feedback regarding our podcast. Please make sure to listen to the Fantasy Boys, who will be back at the end of the week with an all-new episode. Until then, it is goodbye for now.